First of all, what a pleasure it is to be able to introduce Roger Martin to you and to have him here. I spent a really terrific couple of days with Roger up at Rotman and a group of colleagues from Parsons and the New School last February, I think it was. We flew up there and the weather was very accommodating. And we're exposed to something I think that most of you probably in this room already know, but which I found to be so deeply, it left such a deep impression on me, is how remarkable it is that Roger has been able to turn Rotman and the School of Business there into a place that not only gets it, but gets it in the most interesting ways for a group of designers. And in a lot of ways, what Roger's been able to do in introducing design and design thinking into business, into the very structure of the MBA as a degree, but also into the notion of how we go about thinking about business, has been so deeply transformative, clearly in the context of our own design and management program here at Parsons, but broadly and in a way unique still. And I think he'll talk a little bit about that tonight, in the field of higher education for business. There ought to be a lot more people copying Roger. And it's interesting to me that he seems to be able to continue to outrun all of those would-be copiers and create new space continually in his own thinking, in his writing, and in his role as Dean of Rotman. We're going to structure the evening tonight a little bit informally, in that Roger will come and talk for 15, 20 minutes or so, and then he'll be joined by Bruce Nussbaum, who you all know, and we are extremely fortunate to have among our faculty here. Bruce, in many ways, introduced us to Roger, and it has been a very vibrant discussion that has ensued over the course of the last year, and one that I think will continue to bear fruit, not just academically, but institutionally. So we'll have a question and answer session after Bruce and Roger begin by exploring a bit of the long history between the two of them and the issues that have occupied Roger for so many years around the relationship between design and business. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Roger Martin, Dean of Rotman at the University of Toronto.
Well, it's lovely to be here. I always feel great warmth whenever I come to Parsons and visit my friends, and I'm thrilled to be here and talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is design in business. And I thought I'd start off by maybe explaining a little bit about how I got here, how I got to thinking about this, and it's very much because as I tell people, I'm a recovering strategy consultant, and there's a 12-step program for that too. But I spent about 20 years as a strategy consultant, and I was intrigued increasingly as I went along with how much the companies that I worked with wanted to be innovative, right? Really valued the notion of innovation. It didn't just give it lip service. They would invest money and resources of all types in innovation, but rarely got the kind of benefit from it that they were hoping for. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. If in fact they were just, trash talking about it and they didn't really care about innovation, I'd say, okay, I could understand that. But the fact that they actually wanted it and tried hard and spent money on it and didn't get nearly as much progress as they wished, intrigued me. I was also intrigued by this phenomenon of these companies often bringing in outsiders to help with that innovation, often people of a designerly background, designers per se, or people in innovation consulting firms and the like. and they would also pay them money and spend time with them, and often nothing would happen on the basis of the work. Some idea would come up and would somehow get squelched or never come to fruition. So I was intrigued with that, and then I was also intrigued with how these design type people and these business type people kind of interacted or not, as the case may be. So all of those things I just sort of watched over time and tried to gain some understanding of why that would be the case. And the book that I'll talk a little bit about tonight, and then have a conversation with Bruce, and then take as many questions as we can from all of you, is a result of that process of thinking about this thing that rather baffled me. And I've come to the conclusion that it's understandable and explicable. It isn't nearly as inexplicable as when I started looking at it. I think I get it and understand why it's the case, and as far as I'm concerned, it'll continue to be the case for a long time, unless both companies and people in business and designers both understand that there are two very different modes of thinking that don't mesh really nicely with one another, that are actually hard to mix. They can be, but it's not the natural thing for the two to be mixed in a productive way. And in fact, designers are taught to think the one way, and business people another way, and so it perpetuates this gap. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about tonight, is what are those ways of thinking, and how can you put them together in a way that will get us more productivity in innovation. And I think the starting place we have to understand if we're trying to solve the question of how do we bring about innovation is, how does knowledge advance in the world? Because innovation would be something that moves knowledge forward. We didn't understand something before, we understand it now, and so we have a brand new product or service or offering. And what I would argue is you can look generically at how knowledge advances, and I would make the argument that everything that we know now started off at some point as a mystery. And everything comes across the consciousness of mankind as a mystery. And if we look back in time, it can be the mystery of kind of, why do things fall down? If I drop something, why does it fall down? At one point, right, that was a mystery. And then famously, a certain thing, an apple, fell on top of a certain man's head, and we came to an understanding of that mystery, which is that there's a universal force called gravity, named gravity. That's sort of a rule of thumb, a heuristic, a way of understanding what was previously completely a mystery, right? We say, this is not a mystery. We understand there's this thing called gravity that forces things down. Or you could take, there are many in the field of art, right? There was a mystery of how on earth you take a three-dimensional object, right, and represent it in 2 dimensions on a piece of paper, right? So we had cave drawings of people that looked like this for a long time, because that was a mystery to our forefathers, our Egyptian forefathers, and in due course, we study that and come to an understanding. There's something called perspective that helps us understand how we can do that representation. But at this point, it's just a rule of thumb, a way of thinking about it. Much better than a mystery, right? But not yet a complete understanding. With some of these things, in due course, we study them enough, advance knowledge enough, that we get to an algorithm. The third stage, where we know if I drop something, it will accelerate at 32 feet per second squared in America. In Canada, it accelerates at 9.8 meters per second squared. Actually, everywhere else in the world except America. But we won't get into that. So it's an algorithm. It's an actual formula. We know exactly what's happening and why, right? And in due course, we figured out, though it took centuries, that there's a vanishing point, that there's, past this general notion of perspective, there's a vanishing point. And the interesting thing I think about knowledge, I think we always like to think that something that's happening near or now is unique in history. I do think, and often it's not, but in this case, what was unique in history is that in the late part of the 20th century, when you got to algorithm, there was a huge payoff there waiting for you. And that is because we had computers and we could commit that algorithm to code, right? And so Honeywell programmers could figure out, based on what was a mystery, why do things fall down, to a heuristic, there's a thing called gravity, to an algorithm, things accelerate at 32 feet per second squared, you can create autopilot systems to get a 777 to fall out of the sky exactly the way you want it. Or in terms of perspective, you can get a computer to now automatically render something that's 3-dimensional in 2-dimension, and it's dead easy. So I would argue that we have this sort of knowledge funnel that happens where we start with this broad mystery where we don't even know what to pay attention to, take it to a heuristic where we know what to pay attention to and what some of the connections are, to an algorithm where we have a formulaic approach to it. Now, there are some really good things about this funnel. Why on earth would you want to move something through the funnel? The answer is efficiency, right? So when you're looking at a mystery, you're looking in a very inefficient way. You don't know what to pay attention to. You don't know what's going on. This is why, as it turns out, much solving of mysteries in the world is done in nonprofits like this place, right? It's what academics are for, in part, because there's no good schedule to solve a mystery on. You don't know when you're going to get some fundamental understanding. It's often not terribly economic. Hard to capture the externalities. So it often happens in the nonprofit world. Once you've got it to a heuristic, you now know what to pay attention to, right? So when in the field of medicine, we figure out that something is gene-based rather than environmentally based, rather than viral, rather than whatever, you can start looking only in that territory, right? You don't have to look at the whole room. You look at that corner of the room. Now that we've narrowed it down to that, you can be more efficient. Why? Because you're not having to think about as much. And why is an algorithm even more efficient? You know exactly what you've got to think about, and there's a rule, and in general, you can utilize lower cost resources to follow that rule. So think about the last time you phoned a kind of consumer helpline. Where did you probably phone? Bangalore, right? And if it was truly algorithmic, there was an absolute rule associated with it, you probably did pretty well. It would walk you through something and you get a good answer because it's an algorithm. But what if it's not? What if it's a problem that is a little more vague and they don't really understand it yet, and it takes their judgment to solve? What generally happens? You say, no, that's not the problem. And what do? They go on to the next step on their little chart, right? They've got a little chart, ask this question, then when they give you an answer, ask this question, ask this question. When something gets to an algorithm, you don't have any judgment left. There's no judgment, right? There's just following the algorithm, and that can be done more cheaply and more efficiently. And of course, the cheapest and most efficient way to do it is with a computer, right? So as you advance knowledge, you increase efficiency. What is the problem with that? I mean, there's always a plus and a minus to these things. The negative is what? To get that, you have to leave things out, right? So if you're McDonald's, an example I use in the book, if you're McDonald's, the McDonald brothers, 1955, trying to figure out this mystery of, in this new emerging beach and freeway culture in Southern California, how do people want to eat? Right? Answer's a heuristic, the quick service restaurant. We'll narrow the menu down and focus on speed of service, and we'll figure out a production system for getting people through the restaurant more quickly, that's a heuristic. Now, on the basis of that heuristic, they open 4 restaurants. They're wildly profitable. What happens? The guy who sells them their 3-at-a-time milkshake makers, Ray Kroc, says, I think I'm going to buy this, buys the 4 chain, and then turns it into what? An algorithm. Ray Kroc is the mastermind behind the 57-step process to cook a hamburger, and many of other processes, so that how you cite the restaurants, etc. And on the basis of that, he was able to blow that 4-restaurant chain out to a national chain in 10 years and a global chain in 20 years. It's quite impressive how fast that happened. Why? Because it's an algorithm. You go ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. Great efficiency. But what's the problem? The problem is, as you go to algorithm, you're leaving everything else out, including things like when consumers change a little bit and decide maybe they want to eat lunch in a way that doesn't kill them. Not right away, but in due course. Right? Maybe there's something other than steam-cooked beef, deep-fried potatoes, and sugar and milk stirred together. There's another way to solve the mystery of what do people want to eat other than the one you have. So it might be Subway that grows from nothing to a gigantic chain rivaling McDonald's based on a healthier way to eat. So the argument I'd make on advantage and competitive advantage is that firms will enjoy advantage that are able to push things through this funnel faster than their competitors, solve a mystery before their competitors, push it to a heuristic, solve the mystery, make it into a heuristic, then take that heuristic and convert it to an algorithm, right? But rather than then sitting on that algorithm and clipping coupons or sending the money back to the shareholders, is do what? Solve the next mystery that they should be thinking about before their competitors do. And if they do that, they'll have the chance to turn it into a heuristic first and an algorithm first, get more efficient, get the resources to do it again and again, right? Now, if that actually happened, right, the Fortune 100 of 1910, when it was first published, would be very similar to the Fortune 100 now, right? Do you think it is? No. There are only 2 companies of the original Fortune 100 that are still existing freestanding companies, let alone on the list of the Fortune 100. Right? Now, why would that be? Why would that be? If you've got this natural advantage, you've figured something out, you've got that advantage. I would argue the reason is that companies, on the basis of that first advantage, grow to some size and then adopt a pattern of thinking that is inconsistent with advancing knowledge from there. They develop a way of thinking that's about honing and refining within your existing stage, taking a heuristic and making the heuristic work a little bit better, taking the existing algorithm and making it work better, and giving the opportunity from companies that start in garages with no money and no people or no anything other than a willingness to think differently, give them a chance to blow them out. Though then, by the very process of doing that, they tend to stop thinking in the way that got them there, and they get blown out successively. So that's why I think I call design thinking the next competitive advantage. But what is design thinking? Well, for me, what I see is the 2 fundamental kinds of thinking can be characterized this way. They're analytical thinking and intuitive thinking. So what's analytical thinking? Analytical thinking is the kind of thinking that involves using deductive and inductive logic to declare something to be true or false, to analyze what exists now, to regress the past, analyze the present, things that have already happened, and the desire of analytical thinking is to produce a reliable outcome, to produce a consistent, replicable outcome. So you say, I'm going to regress what I know now to produce a reliable, consistent outcome. So if you think about IQ testing, all of you have had your IQ tested probably multiple times, whether you know it or not. When you were a kid in elementary school, you'd have had it tested. The Stanford Binet IQ test, the most popular IQ test in the world by far, is a reliable test. Why? If you take it 10 times in your life, at various stages in your life, you'll get the same score. And that's exactly what you want in a reliable test. So the question is, how do you make something reliable? Well, you make something reliable by making sure that you're measuring only things that are quantifiably measurable, that are free of bias or judgment. And so how do they do that for IQ testing? They define IQ as your ability to solve little logical puzzles, right? Who have an answer A, B, C, D, or E, right? And you actually fill in a little thing on a form, check the box, and they feed the form through a computer, and it spits out your IQ. So the way you get reliability is think about a narrow range of variables, only ones that you can measure very quantitatively, and then crunch those numbers consistently. And it gets you something wonderful, a reliable outcome. I can find out what all of your IQs are, everybody in this room, and I can do it 10 times over and get the same answer. What's the unfortunate problem with IQ tests? What do you think? What would we like an IQ test to do? It would be sort of to predict something about the future, right? Like you'll do really well if you're smart and you won't do so well if you're not so smart, right? That would be nice, right? Be handy. Well, unfortunately, the studies now of the IQ test are pretty definitive, which is that your IQ predicts about 30% of any outcome about you that we would like to know. The other 70% is explained by things completely other than your quote intelligence. So you'd say, wow, that doesn't do exactly what we wanted. Something that does exactly what we want, that has the outcome we would like, is a valid process. A valid test would tell you that. So if I test your blood, if you're looking a little bit tired and sleepy, and we wonder, well, do you have mononucleosis? If I took a vial of your blood, divided it into 100 subsamples, and ran it through the same test, and I got the same answer 100 times, it would be a perfectly reliable test. But is that what you want? Do you want the same answer 100 times? What would you like? I think you'd like to know whether you've got mononucleosis or not, right? And that's seeking a valid outcome. How do you get to a valid outcome? Typically, the way you get to a valid outcome is to consider the more complex situation, more variables, and apply judgment to it, even if that results in bias. And the greatest form of judgment is in intuitive thinking, the gut feel, sort of knowing without reasoning, to say I just take in a whole lot of information. I can't even tell you what it is, and come to my judgment. Now, what's the problem with validity? Right? Validity that has no reliability is hard for an organization to replicate in any way. Right? So you can have Harvey Weinstein and his golden gut at Miramax figuring out that The Crying Game and Pulp Fiction and The English Patient are going to be successful movies when nobody else thinks they are going to be, and guess what, they are. They all win Oscars. But what happens to Miramax when the golden gut leaves? It's a completely unreplicable process. So you've got this battle between analytical and intuitive thinking. Analytical that's attempting to achieve reliability, that's attempting to exploit what we know now, versus intuitive thinking that's validity oriented, that's trying to explore new territories. And if we ask how on earth, Roger, does that relate to the knowledge funnel? What I'd argue is that analytical thinking is for honing and refining knowledge in the current stage. It's for making that heuristic a little bit better or making that algorithm a little bit better, but it is not for taking a mystery and converting it to a heuristic or heuristic and converting it to an algorithm. Why is that? It's because the fundamental forms of logic required for exploring the future are not inductive and deductive logic. And this is where a great early 20th century American pragmatist philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce comes in, because he did the lovely analysis that said, you know what, I cannot demonstrate how any new idea in the history of the world came about by way of inductive or deductive logic. And since we know that there are new ideas in the world, they seem to come along all the time, there must be some other form of logic that got us there. And he called it abductive logic, what he called a logical leap of the mind or an inference to the best explanation. So when you see something that's anomalous, that doesn't fit deductively with a principle that has been passed down over time, or it's only one data point or a few data points, so it's not, you can't use statistical analysis to inductively prove something, but you still want to understand it, you need to use abduction, inference, making an inference. What do I see? What's the best explanation? But you simply cannot prove that in advance. It will only be proven by the passage of time. So that's the kind of thinking that you need to advance knowledge, and that's what I term design thinking. Lots of people have different terminology or explanation of what design thinking is. That's mine. Design thinking to me is the productive combination of analytical thinking, so that you produce some level of reliability, with intuitive thinking, the abductive logic and the inference to best explanation, the invention of the future, the exploration of the future, so that you can get the best of both. You can get enough reliability for a corporation or a big organization to say, yeah, we can do this, but with enough validity, enough exploration of the future that will enable you to move knowledge forward. Now, the problem, right, at least from my perspective, is that the people who are analytically thinking driven tend to not particularly like the people who are intuitive thinking oriented, and vice versa, right? Which is why, so back to the questions, why is it that even when corporations bring in kind of designerly people, things don't happen? They don't move things ahead. I think it's because the designerly oriented people are doing validity-oriented, intuitive-oriented, exploration-oriented thinking that makes the business people very nervous. And it doesn't obey the laws that they use to rule their own lives, right? Which is prove it. They say prove it. Now, if you ask Charles Saunders Peirce whether you can prove anything in anything new in advance, he would say you can't. So the minute a corporation says, prove this new idea, that means you're done, right? You're done. You cannot. You absolutely cannot prove a new idea in advance. And so when these two forces come together, they tend to kind of reject one another. Now, I think, and I think that's the great challenge for a company to maintain itself over time, right? If we want a company to have the competitive advantage I've described, right? Advance things through the knowledge funnel faster than your competitors, earn the financial rewards from that, so that you can then solve the next mystery and the next mystery and the next mystery. You need both. You absolutely need both, and you can't live without both. Because of these different forms of thinking, they tend to not live together very well, right? And that's why the big established companies don't have the incumbency advantage that you would expect. So one more slide, then we'll talk to Bruce. Is what people often ask me, designers say to me, it feels like in a business I'm in hostile territory. and businesses often complain to me about these wacky people who come in and scare them. And so I say, actually, both of you have to, treat each other a little bit differently if you want to succeed. So for the designers here in the room, of which most of you are, you can take these as advice for you. I would give the same advice to business people, right? So what are the 5 things to think about? 1, reframe extreme views as a creative challenge. So for me, what I find perplexing about designers, the more I hang around with designers, the more I say, wow, isn't this great? You give them this incredible design challenge. You could be like, Mr. Sony, who comes in with the thing and says, I want you to make a video camera that fits into my hand like this little mock-up that he had. And it's like, what? That camera's smaller than a cassette. How can you have a camera smaller than the cassette that fits in it? But we can do it. We can do it. The designers say, we can do it, and they do it, right? And so I say, that's interesting. You have this indefatigable kind of, willingness to solve these almost impossible design challenges. Then you ask them, you say to the designers, you know what? This corporation you're working in doesn't really believe in design very much, and they make you make them really nervous. So now go and do it anyway. So many designers I talk to say, "Oh no, I can't do that. I mean, they're just unfriendly to design, and that's impossible. I'll do something else." And I say to myself, "But that seems like the same kind of design challenge as like the camera, right? Why is that not a legitimate challenge?" So I'd say to designers, treat design unfriendliness as what? A design challenge. It's as good a design challenge as any you're going to find, right? Now you'd say, I'm being unfair to designers. What about those? I'm letting the managers off the hook. No, I'm not, right? Managers, right, like difficult management challenges. How can we get this product out in time, and how can we organize all of this? Everything's a management challenge to them, except when a designer shows up and starts talking kind of validity, exploration, abductive, logic-oriented, and then they just say, I can't deal with these people. They're weird. No, treat that as a management challenge. It's a legitimate management challenge. If you're a good manager, you figure out how to make that work. So that would be the first one. It's those extreme views are a creative challenge, or a creative design challenge, or a creative management challenge, not something silly that you should reject out of hand. Number 2 is empathy. Empathize with your colleagues on that other extreme. So one of the reasons why designers and, from my observation, designers and business people don't work well together is they spend their time getting mad at one another rather than empathizing with one another. So the designers are inclined to say those sticks in the mud, oh, they're just worried about consistency and making sure everything works. And it's like, yes, because they have to pay the bills, right? They sort of have to do that. So if instead you just treat them that way, of course they won't be. And same with the business people, right? They say, well, we don't have enough innovation. We need new products, the innovation to keep up and keep ahead of our company. So we'll bring in these designers, and then the designers start acting all innovative and everything. And you say, I can't stand working with these people. They make me nervous. Why are they being so being so irresponsible and whatever? No, empathize with them. You've just asked them to be innovative, and maybe they will be innovative and do that. Number 3, learn to speak the languages of both reliability and validity, right? So it turns out that if you just watch the language that you see in business, they're all languages of validity. It's best demonstrated practice, it's proof. They'll use reliability a lot. How can we make sure this is reliable, right? And designers tend to come in and speak the language of validity. They'll say, "This will be great. This will be fantastic. It'll be just awesome." Think, right? And because that's what they care about. They care about an awesome outcome, something that's valid in the future. But that, of course, scares the bejesus out of the business people, and the business people's language depresses the designers. And so if they can learn to speak each other's languages, they'll go a long way. 4 is step back from perfection to be understood. So in this one, I think business people want to explain their reliable systems all the way to the conclusion to say, I need to, here's why I'm thinking what we ought to do, and here's exactly why we have to do it. What I say to business people is, don't explain to the designers your answer. Explain all the logic and reasoning behind it, but don't ask for your answer to be your answer, or you're not going to be helpful. And same with the designer. You have to communicate rather than have perfection. The last thing is turn the future into the past. This I think is, if there's only one lesson, it would be this one, right? Which is that reliability is all about regressing the past. Inductive and deductive logic is all about stuff that's happened already, right? You can't do a statistical analysis of stuff that hasn't happened. So you can't, so induction, that's out, right? And you can't prove anything deductively about the future. So for an analytically thinking, exploitation-oriented, reliability-oriented person, the future has no legitimacy whatsoever. So a designer can say till they're blue in the face, if we do this, it'll be awesome, awesome. And I really believe it to the depth of my heart. And the person is just saying, that's the future. That's all speculative. Nothing to think about, right? The designer is thinking about the future and less about the past. Why? Because they've been brought in typically to what? Change the past. Duh. So the one's focused on the future, one's focused on the past. Now, if you think about it, the bad thing about the future, right? The bad thing about the next 3 months for the reliability-oriented person is it's in the future. What's the good thing about the next 3 months? But in 3 months, it will be what? The past, right? So the trick is to try something that enables you to turn the future into the past. So I say to the designers, don't try and say, let's do it all right now, or you don't really believe in me. It's, what can I do that says, I'm making this prediction about the future, and we're going to try it for 3 months, and here's what I think is going to happen if we try it for 3 months. And guess what? If what I say happens doesn't happen, it isn't going to kill us, right? But here's exactly what I think is going to happen. You go out 3 months. What's the lovely thing? You said 3 months ago what you think is going to happen, and if it happens, guess what? It's now in the past, and it's absolutely legitimate. So I think the best designers that I've observed over my career now, watching them for quite a long time, have a knack for turning the future into the past, right? And I think the best business men and women that I've worked with have a willingness to allow the future to be turned into the past. And this is why prototyping, is good. Mal sell, make a little, sell a little. You'll hear business people say that. Let's just make a little, sell a little, and see how it goes. Those are all tricks for turning the future into the past. And I think that's what enables companies, if they've got a business person who cares about that and designers who help them with that, they can keep on advancing knowledge through the funnel rather than getting stuck and getting wound up in their analytical, reliability-oriented thinking. And that's what I wrote the book about. The book is an optimistic view that says, actually, if we take the best of reliability-oriented thinking and validity-oriented thinking, we can create companies with massive sustained advantage. It's not impossible, but it's just a little bit harder than people think because both sides do not realize how fundamentally their ways of thinking clash. So that's a little summary of it. And Bruce, I'd be happy to talk about anything and then answer questions. Thanks a bunch.
Good.
Thanks.
Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah. Here's some water. I really like this list, by the way. I was at another event last night with Roger and Tim Brown A lot of Tims. Tim Brown of IDEO and Will Setliff from Target, talking about the same sort of stuff. And he was dressed very differently yesterday. He had on a,
Yes.
tie and da-da-da. So I was thinking of extending this list in terms of, empathy. So if you're a designer, you really have to, empathize with the business side and dress in a suit and tie, and then you have to empathize with their music. I'm not sure what business music is, but your playlist should be different.
I think it's polkas, I think.
Polkas, or whatever. Food, you're going to have to eat a lot more steak, I guess, if you're whatever. You can play it all out. So there you go. I like that.
I was going to apologize for dressing like I had to be dressed. I had board meetings the last 2 days, so I had to be all dressed up, and I was tired of that, so I came in my more normal regalia.
Well, I had a chance to wear a tie for the first time in months, so that was good, since you don't wear ties around here. I do have one question. This is a very significant question.
Yes.
And it has to do with the funnel, which I like the funnel. My only problem is, or my only question is, so here's the funnel, right? I don't understand why it's sort of like top down, why you have mystery here and it filters this way, and why it actually shouldn't be a chimney going up. What was the point of having it go top down?
It's interesting you asked that, because for a long time it went side to side. It went from left to right, but we decided the other way.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Wait.
Like
I can't
that.
Like this?
Yeah, so to connote advance of knowledge, but then
Cone.
I decided, since we're using the funnel metaphor and funnels kind of funnel down, that I'd use that. However, I have a brilliant friend in the audience, Jennifer Rial, who helped edit this book and whatever, and she was more into the advance funnel than the downward funnel. Am I right? So she might have been more right.
How many people like this the cone, as opposed to this? Or how about this? Anyone like the chimney?
See, I like that. I mean, there's a side of me that likes the chimney, and in that you're sort of building something as you go. So I like that metaphor. The only thing about it is this notion of what is important to me is this notion that you only, I don't know, it's important to me. Maybe it's not, but you only advance knowledge by leaving stuff out, right? There's a real paradox there, right? If you don't leave stuff out, you don't advance your knowledge at all. There's nothing you can do to understand something more when you have to pay attention to everything. And so what we do and what scientists essentially do is, in an organized way, leave stuff out for the advantage of knowledge. And I just think it's something we don't kind of really understand well enough. And I think it's sort of, you could argue it's a scientific modernist tradition that has pushed us in that direction. And as you could probably tell from my writing, I think we've pushed that too far. We've left things out and acted as though we can have great benefits from a narrow view of what is in fact a complicated world. And that's why I'm so worried now about the capital markets and the pressures on corporations to, when they make a bunch of money, is to give it back to the shareholders. That's bad for the shareholders, right? I want them to invest in solving the next mystery, not saying, we figured this out. I mean, think of the tailspin that McDonald's went into. I mean, McDonald's is now having a bit of a rebirth, but the tailspin was of saying people will eat pressure cooked meat, beef, deep fried potatoes, and sugar and milk.
And they did for the longest time, until they didn't.
Yeah.
Until they stopped.
Yeah, and that's the problem with it, they got to a point where I would argue all their systems and processes inside were reliability oriented, were all about analysis, honing and refining. So they'd have huge numbers of people honing the algorithm for site selection for McDonald's. What traffic flow patterns, morning, evening, volumes, whatever, and people who would be analyzing rostering, what's the optimal way to roster a restaurant. All of those things were honing and refining what was then known, and to a great extent ignoring the great danger that comes from outside the set of variables that are now in the equation, in the algorithm.
So, how do I put this? John C. Lee Brown is one of my favorite guys who writes about the social life of information and stuff like that. Gave a talk about a year ago in which what he described, I think he called it cascading innovation or cascading change, in which he put forth the idea that there are periods of time when there's incremental change, or even significant change, and then you have something and people adapt to it. It takes time, over decades, sometimes a century. And then there are other periods of time in history when you have a lot of change happening at the same time, and a lot of change affecting the change. And he would argue that with the digital revolution, with the integration of the world economy, communism fading away, with the rise and fall of generations and countries and all of that, we're in a period of cascading change. Yeah. And so that period of stability where efficiency is very efficient, right? Optimal, is really shot to hell. And therefore, it requires something else. Yeah. And that's what the other side of what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I would buy that, and that of course relates to Thomas Kuhn, the structure of scientific revolutions too, where you have normal science proceeding for a while, honing and refining, and then you get some sort of set of events that causes a big disruption, and the old paradigm goes out the window, and a new one comes. And so I do think that's right, and that's why I think. There's a lot of honing and refining that goes on, and then every once in a while there's a jump from one stage of the funnel to another. And I think there are probably times in history where it appears that there are more or less of that jumping that goes on. I might not see it as much systemically as John C. Lee Brown does, but he may be absolutely right. I just think it depends on what you're paying attention to. Right, I think there are some, at any time in the course of human endeavors, some things are in a very honing, refining, static kind of state, but other things get highly disrupted. And I think we tend to pay attention to the highly disruptive things. So I might say, in the 60s, we had great disruption of kind of universities and political systems and the like, but at the same time, business was in an amazingly honing and refining kind of mode. It was almost sort of impervious to what was going on in the universities and the government halls. So where we look back on the 60s as a time of incredible change in information, I look at it back and say some and some not at all. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to look at each sort of knowledge domain and ask, in a given knowledge domain, are we busily honing and refining, or are we trying to make the next leap? And I'm interested in figuring out what set of kind of events has to happen, what kind of people have to be involved to make the next leap. Because as you can tell, I now believe more so than probably I ever have that you have to have a company that's focusing on both, or you'll have yet another whole slew of one generation companies. Like, will Microsoft, right? Will Microsoft be around for more than one generation? It's a really big question.
Is it? It's not a question in my mind.
Yes, well, that.
Or
I'm
Google?
trying- Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. That it's a test. You have to kind of rethink what you're doing in a fundamental way, what you're doing, the way you're doing it, why you're doing it, and people would generally prefer to just keep doing what they're doing.
And does it matter?
It might not. I mean, maybe creative destruction is what we need. We need one generation companies that go by the wayside. I kind of am. I'm sentimental and romantic, and so I like. No, I am. I'm hopelessly so. And so I like a Procter and Gamble being around for 175 years and continuing to be vibrant and interesting. But maybe societally it doesn't matter at all.
You embody your, the graphic up here, strategist, romantic, and...
I'm weird. I'm wired funny, that's for sure.
I think everybody in this room is wired funny.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask two questions and then open it up. Well, there'll be big questions. And we'll open it up anyhow. I know you're very, very interested in education.
Yes.
And we've been talking about the corporation, and we were talking about cultures of the corporation. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts about liberal arts as a body of knowledge and the structure around which it's presented, the university. Because I know you have some strong feelings, thoughts about it.
Well, a few things. One is I am increasingly worried, and I now sound kind of old fogey-ish, right? But I'm increasingly worried that we're doesn't it sound when sigh that we're that
just say it's the great challenge ahead of us.
The great challenge ahead of us, yes.
Yes.
Is that we're getting too applied in our higher education too fast. And what people are learning are honing and refining algorithms, and so I like the notion behind liberal arts as a philosophy, right? I mean, the best thing about it is saying for 4 years we're going to hold off getting too applications oriented. We're going to try and learn something fundamental upon which applications can be built, and I will build some applications in due course, but unless I get some fundamental knowledge, instead of leaping straight into I'm gonna figure out how to make a transistor or whatever, and I'll get taught in a lab how to do that. That having been said, there's a couple things that make me kind of less romantic about liberal arts. One is I literally don't care what subject territory you're studying. So I think you could have liberal science, kind of liberal business, education, and it would be as effective as liberal arts if it has the right philosophy, which is about teaching you how to think and stopping you from getting to the applications layer before you learn the fundamentals. That would be one. And the second thing, and this informs what I'm doing so much at the Rotman School is I think the idea behind kind of liberal arts is a liberal arts education. To me, is sort of a vague idea about by doing this, we will teach you how to sort of think about thinking and be able to think broadly. And I think that's too vague and too self-satisfied. I think there's something more specific that we can teach that will help people think broadly, right? And I think that is the...
You mean think to do or think in a different way?
No, it's to be able to think across boundaries, right? And that's why the liberal arts, you're going to take some philosophy, some history, some literature, some everything. And the notion is that by doing that broad kind of thing, you'll come out as a person who can think broadly. That's not good enough for me. I think we have to teach people the basic science of interdisciplinarity, and not just say, we'll give you 4 years of experience and you will by osmosis become interdisciplinary. I think it's just, this is one of these things where we've messed around with that sort of vague notion for far too long, because we're lazy about it. And there is a basic science of interdisciplinarity to be taught, and we're not doing it. I mean, we draw boundaries, right? We draw boundaries between knowledge domains, and then we complain about the boundaries. So we say, well, marketing is different than production. And so we'll have some marketing professors learn about marketing, some production professors learn about production, and then we get into companies, and then we say, oh dear, actually our marketing decisions influence our production, and so the boundary between them is bad. Those are silos. And so then we slam together marketing and production. But all that does is redraw the boundary. Right? You can't get rid of boundaries around knowledge domains. Right? It's just a matter of redrawing them. And we're constantly redrawing them, just like we reorganize companies. Right? And if boundaries are a problem, the question is, what is a fundamental pattern of thinking that enables you to think across boundaries? Why don't we teach that? Is my question. So if I were designing a liberal arts program, it would be a program designed to teach the basic science of interdisciplinarity, and I wouldn't care a hell of a lot what material I used to do that. But that's the highest, best skill I could impart.
I bet you there's a lot of people in this room who would say that design and design thinking are what you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be, I guess I would say the very, very best of designers that I've met are fantastic at turning the future into the past, and are fantastic at actually thinking across boundaries and saying, I know they're thinking about that with that model, I'm thinking about this in my model, how can I make those go together? I don't believe that design, and I may be wrong, so Parsons may do it, I don't believe that design schools explicitly teach that. I think you either absorb it somehow, or you get it by osmosis. And I'm always, I mean, again, why do we have universities anyway, right? The idea is just time shrinkage, right? No, notionally anybody could go out and into the world and learn all the stuff that they learn in university, but notionally that would take them maybe 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. And we say, because we've thought about this a bunch, again, knowledge funnel, we've taken mysteries and made them into heuristics. We say, we figured out that there's a bunch of stuff that we can impart to you over 4 years. That'll give you a 20-year experience in 4 years. And which I think, so I believe in education. So I asked myself the question, why, in perhaps the most important thing that can make a person successful or not, do we leave it to your experience to gather? And I think laziness is the number one reason. Mm-hmm. That we're just lazy, because it's harder. It's harder to think about interdisciplinarity than to think about one discipline.
I like that. Something to chew on. Okay, let's open it up to some questions. Start at the back. You. Stand up and introduce yourself.
And you probably need a mic so that they can record this.
Or you go, yeah. All right.
I'll bring it to you.
Perfect. How you doing?
Good.
Good. My name is Samson. I'm a student here at Parsons and Eugene Lang, and I've agreed with a lot of what you've been saying. But my question will probably be on the last couple of things that you've said. I certainly agree, generally, that a design school does not teach all of these applications of, what a kind of a business production sense would be that kind of the method of the conceptualization of what you want as a productive business person is applicable to what you practice as a designer. You see a problem and you say, okay, how can I make something to fix this? How can I make something to have people see this in a certain light? So when you sit down to make a painting, or when you sit down to make some sort of graphic design, these are the same principles that you're thinking of. But I would argue that you should, or at least I would like to, kind of expand the definition of a designer as not just visual, but more of like a social designer, someone who conceptualizes any sort of idea. So then you kind of bring in these other aspects of the liberal arts as the other things. But I guess my question is this possible, and do you have to have this business background of what works? Because, I guess I've always kind of thought that, you need to really learn how to create, and this is applicable to all avenues of life, but is it essential to learn basically the past?
Well, a couple things. One is, when I think of designers, I do think very broadly. I think it is a mistake to think of designers as designing objects or graphics or whatever. That's to me relatively unhelpful view of design. I think designers should think about designing social systems, designing corporate structures if they want, designing anything. To me, design is is an approach to thinking about, it's approach to thinking about how do you move across the funnel in whatever medium you're talking about. And I think one of the great things about design thinking as a movement now is that I think it's encouraging designers to think more broadly about their role. I think a designer's job should be this imagining the future and using their abductive logic to imagine the future, no question. But what I'd just say is they're going to be more successful if they can understand and empathize with the business people who are busily honing the past. To me, it's pretty simple, right? Which is you can be an architect who designs great houses that never ever get built, right? Or you can be one that has some of them being built, and probably if every single one of them is being built, you're probably not trying hard enough. But if none of them or almost none of them get built, it's probably you're restricting your own success. Okay.
Another question? Over here. How old was Zaha Hadid when she built her first actual structure?
Hello.
Hello.
Oh. Hi.
Hi, my name is Xenia, and I'm a design and management student at Parsons.
Right.
And I wanted to make a comment or two and then ask a question. So one of my first comments is that we do take a social thought class in design and management, which is fantastic. And the first reading we did was about design as a new liberal art. So I'm sure you'll be happy about that.
I am.
And,
That's good.
yeah, and then the second comment that I have is that basically Starbucks got me into college because I wrote my design and management essay on Starbucks as a model of branding.
Yep.
And I want to point out that I think that they are an example of a company that in a lot of ways has been very algorithmic, and they expanded in a very algorithmic way. And then the way you see them kind of adjusting and making moves towards being more qualitative is by consistently trying to shift as market perception changes and as people's habits change. This is where you see them introducing music, and this is where you see them introducing new food items, and this is where you see them rebranding like they did recently with I think they're reintroducing Pete's Coffee House, and it's basically a Starbucks, but they're redesigning it and making it more rustic and more earthy and less packaged. And then what they did in their design approach was they would have design templates, and they would never be very cheap looking or appearing. You would have, a lot of earth tones and a lot of richness, and this idea of a common luxury, brown as an elevation from dirt to a luxurious warm color. So they would take things, they would expand in a very algorithmic way, and then take things that are qualitative, that appeal to people emotionally, and then continue to adjust qualitatively, and that's how they're trying to stay on top. As, of course, Dunkin' Donuts getting ahead for a minute, and they have to adjust. So, of course, I've been following the Starbucks story a little closely since I got into Parsons. And then my question is specifically about the music industry. I think that the music industry was very algorithmic for a very long time, and they've always sort of, package and sell, package and sell. And then the entire business model flipped upside down when digital sales were introduced. So you have, the digital sales are at their lowest point since they started being recorded ever. And no one's making money from digital sales anymore. So the labels want to give 360 deals to the artists where they take a piece of your merchandising and they want to manage you and they're involved in everything. And the only time a lot of artists think where it makes sense to sign with a major now is where you have a company like Live Nation, where they can give you huge venues and you can get a lot of money from touring. So, they're trying to change how they make money, because the system of honing and refining on sales of a packaged good just isn't working, because the production of the good has changed and the marginal cost is different with the digital production. So how do you think, as a theorist, how do you think maybe the music industry in these coming years, as it shifts and in the years following this, in the next decade or two or three, with technology and with the return to, say, live music, how do you think the music industry can adjust and adapt and be more qualitative and intuitive? Do they need to be more intuitive? How do they address, if they change what they're doing, does that mean what they were doing before was bad? How do they shift shift their model?
Yeah. Well, I'd say a couple of things. One is the examples you've provided, I do show the trickiness of the problem, right? Which is that if Starbucks wants to keep on growing and growing, right, and being able to open more and more stores to satisfy in part the capital markets who get ahead of themselves, they have to make it more algorithmic, and they do that, and then in due course, right, they wake up one day and sort of say this kind of lovely experience has become more machine-like, and we're using espresso machines and labor-saving devices and all these things that kind of wreck the Starbucks experience, and then you've got to go and kind of reinvent it. So, and same with the record companies. So I think that's a good analysis. And one of the things I'm just sidelight that I'm sort of pounding away at these days. I've got an article coming out. You'll like the article that I'm writing that's coming out in January. Because he's subversive like I am. And I'm really worried about the effect of the capital markets on this very thing. So what a company's stock price is something ethereal, right? It's only the amalgamation of all the expectations of people looking at a company about its future. Right, because if the S&P 500 is trading at 26 times earnings, what that means is that you're paying 4% of the price for the current earnings and 96% of the price for what you expect earnings to be in the future. So if you're Starbucks and you start being successful early on and start expanding rapidly, the stock market then sort of says, I think you're going to expand rapidly forever. Because it's stupid, right? It turns everything into a straight line. Then Starbucks executives wake up and say, the only way to keep our stock price from cratering is to actually open stores like crazy and expand like crazy, because that's what they're expecting us to do. How do you do that? Can you do that with a heuristic? No. You can only do it if you've got a template, an algorithm. And you can send some people out and they'll just put one up here and do it like this and hire baristas like this and and the like. So there is and then if you think about how the capital markets go, although maybe you're less interested in that than I am, I don't know. The capital markets are very reliability oriented. So you hear the expression, did they make their quarterly number or not? Well, all the analysts get together and there's a number established for what earnings per share you should make this quarter. If you miss that by a penny, the stock market whaps you over the head. If you make it by 5 extra cents, they give you almost no benefits for it. And so they're interested in reliability, being utterly consistent. So what does that picture all do? It says you have to make things more algorithmic for us, the capital markets, because we want you to be consistent and we want you to grow exactly the way we think you ought to grow, not the way it's good for you to grow. So that's why you had the publicly traded Starbucks and the publicly traded record companies all continuing to hone and refine algorithms to try and be as reliability oriented as possible. What's the problem? The problem is when things change. And they changed in the case of the music industry, or you push things to extreme, and I would say Starbucks pushed them to extreme and left room for McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts to just sell similar coffee, not in the same experience, but similar coffee for a half or a fifth in the case of McDonald's the price. And in the case of the music industry, kind of things change, technology changed, the ability for people to work around the honed and refined system. What's going to happen in the future? Don't know. I'm not enough of a record industry or recording industry, aficionado to know. All I would say is that I think the recording companies that stare into mysteries, right, rather than avert their eyes, right, which is what mainly happens in corporations. It's don't make me look there. If they stare straight into the mysteries and work on them, they'll be better off than averting their eyes. And of course, the record companies first spent their time averting their eyes, just downloading Napster, and then what did they do? And they sued the children.
That's right.
All right. Rather than asking questions like, how could this play out differently? What are they really looking for that we're not giving them, or the like? So I would just say I don't know the answer to that particular problem. It's the questions that you ask. What's the mystery? Why is it there? What inferences can I make to a new solution? How can I turn the future into the past, prototype something that'll give me a chance to solve, to come up with a useful solution to that mystery? That's what they need to be doing.
That's the mystery. Some more questions? Yeah.
An observation.
And here, hang on that way everybody can
Right.
hear you.
And
Thank you.
introduce yourself, please.
Hi there, Sherry Novick, partner of Rita Susiegel Resources Design Management Consulting and firm, and founder CEO of Planet Soar. So, an argument for the chimney metaphor. By reducing the mystery to an algorithm, it enables you to replicate, which enables you to scale and, of course, monetize until the macro factors change, right? And then throws everything into, and just in terms of the McDonald's example, assumes that the macro factors, right, the broad macro trends, economic, demographic, environmental, technological, cultural, and value, that they stay the same and there's no variables, and assumes that the original framework remains the same until it doesn't, right, until it changes. So
That's right. No, that's the right analysis, and then the question is, right, when it changes, have you been engaging in a set of activities that get you practiced up for what to do when it changes? And the answer typically is no. You've gotten everybody practiced up at doing what they've been doing, at being kind of reductionist. I'm on the board up in Canada, board of trustees of our wonderful children's hospital, the Hospital for Sick Children. It's one of the world's best children's hospital. It has a fantastic research organization. The head of it till recently was a guy named Manuel Buchwald, who's a really thoughtful researcher, a geneticist. He's got the guy who discovered the cystic fibrosis gene, and he was telling me about the Human Genome Project and what made him so nervous about it. He said, for the last, we talked about this about 5 years ago, he said, for the last 10 or 15 years, the only way you could get funded and the only way you could move your career forward was to be involved in the Human Genome Project. And when we started out with the Human Genome Project, we said as soon as we get the human genome all coded, we're just going to get answers to all these questions. They'll just melt away. All these mysteries will melt away because we've got the Human Genome Project coded. And he said, what did people do during that period? Well, they were given a slice of the gene, and they were given essentially an algorithm for how you code that, and they worked away on that. And he said, here's the sad thing, Roger. When we got it sequenced, the whole bloody thing sequenced from start to finish, what we figured out that it actually wasn't about an individual gene. It was about complex interactions between genes and all this stuff. He said, but by the time we got there, we had the entire medical research community all practiced up at sequencing, reductionist kind of sequencing stuff, and then we suddenly needed them to think completely differently. And he said it's going to take years to kind of train up another kind of group to dealing with this massive complexity. And he was just wistful, because there was a point of his retirement, just toward the end of his career, and he said, we used to be good at that, Roger, but after 10 or 15 years of going in a utterly reductionist direction, thinking that was the solution, we're out of practice.
That's the best explanation I've heard for the general disappointment that has come out of, what happened. People ask, well, Jesus, this thing happened, and then nothing followed through.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, he would say it was terrific in that we now know better questions to ask.
Yeah.
But there were no answers forthcoming, or very few. But this is why I kind of think about these things, and I think always in terms of human dynamics and what do people do and what's on their minds, because we train ourselves to think in certain ways, and I think then kind of we're stuck doing that, and if you have a whole corporation full of people honing and refining the current algorithm, it's hard. So I sort of empathize with Howard Schultz, sort of, but sort of not. I mean, the sort of not is, he left Starbucks and said, you people, go kind of continue, and arguably he left them in a honing and refining mode, and then he goes away for 3 or 4 years, and it kind of hits the wall, and he comes back and says, imagine what's going on here, right? It's like the Casablanca, I'm shocked to find gambling going on here. They're too young. It's an old movie. But Howard, you were heading down a honing and refining mode. Surprise that the organization after you left continued honing and refining, kind of not trying to innovate the next future. So there's a real, we economists call it path dependence. It's a weird word, but you get on a given path, and then your future moves are very dependent on the path you're on already. And that's why, unless you commit to both honing and refining and inventing the new, you'll get good at one or the other, and that'll determine what you are as a company.
Roger, thank you very, very, very much. I think you're going to go back there and do some book things.
I will sign anybody's book who wants it signed.
Okay, and if you want to have some more conversation, that's the place to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.